What's up guys, Batman TST here, and today we are going to continue our 5-part series on the Halo story so far. So let's jump in and pick up with Halo 2. This chapter of the Halo Saga begins near what remains of Installation 04. Many Covenant vessels have gathered around High Charity, a large ship that acts as the capital city of the Covenant forces. Here, Supreme Commander Thel Vadami is having a hearing in front of the leaders of the Covenant, the Prophets. He is questioned by them about his failure to protect the destroyed Halo. He is labeled a traitor and is stripped of his title, armor, and is physically branded with the Mark of Shame. Meanwhile, the Master Chief is on board the Cairo station in orbit around the Earth, receiving his Mark VI armor. A ceremony is held to honor Sergeant Johnson, Chief, and Commander Miranda Keyes, daughter of Captain Jacob Keyes, who receives the Colonial Cross in her father's place. Alarms begin to sound indicating that the Covenant have found Earth. Admiral Hood is puzzled by the size of the invasion force, mentioning that the fleet that destroyed Reach was 50 times this size. Admiral Hood orders Master Chief to defend the station. The Chief and Johnson see a Covenant boarding craft latch itself onto the Cairo station. The door between the boarding party and our heroes is broken through and the combat begins. After fighting Covenant throughout the station, soon a Marine notices through a hangar viewport that another station known as the Malta is seeing the Covenant boarding craft appear to be fleeing from the station. Thinking that the UNSC forced the aliens into retreat, the station exploded without warning. After fighting through another hangar, the Athens station also blows up. Cortana indicates that it must be a bomb. The Spartan's then tasked with finding the bomb aboard the Cairo station. Chief makes his way to an elevator that will take him to the bomb. John goes in and clears the room of Covenant defenses. With Cortana's help, he deactivates it with very little time left. Master Chief plans to leave the station to give the Covenant back their bomb. Then the Spartan drags the bomb to an empty launch bay. He releases the door controls and the bay begins to decompress quickly. As the bomb slides out past him, he jumps out and grabs one of the spikes on the bomb as it is pulled into space. As he approaches the Covenant carrier below, he activates the bomb and kicks off of it, and the blast helps propel him to land on the UNSC ship in amber clad. Commander Keyes tells Chief that they're taking the fight to the surface. As they reach Old Mombasa, the Master Chief is tasked with capturing the Prophet and finding out why the aliens only landed here. But before a plan of action can be made, the Pelican he was in is shot down by a Scarab. The Spartan and some Marines begin fighting through the streets, and the Spartan comes across a Warthog that is dropped off for him, and he makes his way to the beach where elites are coming down in pods. After fighting his way past them, he makes his way to a tunnel, fighting off many Covenant forces. Cortana mentions that the Covenant almost seems surprised to find the humans here. The Master Chief eventually makes it out of the tunnel, and there he sees the Scarab. Sergeant Johnson drops off a Scorpion tank, and the Spartan takes it and fights his way across a large bridge, fighting through the Covenant forces trying to stop him from getting to the Prophet of Regret. After clearing the bridge, he takes the Scorpion down the tunnel and ends up having to leave the tank behind as he makes his way on foot further into the tunnel. He eventually finds an exit and gets back outside, and a Gauss Warthog pulls up to the Chief and he climbs aboard. Together they make their way to the streets of New Mombasa. The Chief runs to a nearby building and gets to the top, where a bridge is right above where the Scarab is about to be. The Master Chief jumps on top of the vehicle and kills all the Covenant on board, and destroys the Scarab. They realize that the Prophet of Regret is leaving the system. They follow the carrier as it jumps into slip space. Thel Vadami is being taken to the mausoleum of the Arbiter, where the Prophet of Truth will decide the terms of his execution. But they instead offer him to become the next Arbiter and silence a heretic leader and all who follow him. The Arbiter and a team of elites go down to the planet Threshold, using a nearby storm to mask their approach. As they make their way further inside, fighting is happening down below the transparent floor between the heretics and the Flood. Moving forward, they come across a room with dead bodies strewn about. A small orb comes, and the holographic image of the heretic leader appears. He mentions that he is flattered the Arbiter sent after him. After the communication stops, the Flood appear. After clearing the room of the Flood, they go through a doorway and find an elevator. After they leave the elevator to head back outside, they get to a large room where the leader's on the other side of the shielded door, where he locks himself inside. The Arbiter devises a plan to force the heretic leader out by cutting the cable holding up the station. The plan succeeds and the leader flees on a Banshee before the Arbiter can get to him. He follows in a Banshee of his own. The Arbiter makes his way to the heretic leader. He asks the heretic where he learned his lies, and 343 Guilty Spark flies down to meet the pair. We realize now that he is the Oracle who is ready to answer the Arbiter's questions. But before the Arbiter can ask anything, the heretic leader attacks the Arbiter. The leader activates 2 small hologram orbs that create lifelike images of himself. After fighting and finally killing the heretic leader, 343 regrets his death. The Arbiter says he had no choice. The 343 is pulled to the gravity hammer of Tartarus. The Brute tells the Arbiter that they're leaving the system. Meanwhile, Master Chief and the others, while following the Prophet's carrier through slipspace, arrive at another Halo, Installation 05. The Spartan is tasked with capturing the Prophet of Regret and gets down to the surface of the ring via a drop pod along with some ODSTs. They clear a landing zone and a Warthog is dropped off for them. They believe the Prophet to be located in a temple above the lake. But to get there, they fight through the Covenant to extend a bridge. Another Pelican arrives and drops off a Scorpion tank to fight off the Wraiths up ahead. The Master Chief passes through a multitude of Forerunner ruins, making his way to a massive temple, where Cortana listens to a hologram of Regret and translates that he's planning on activating Halo. A new plan is made where Commander Keyes and Sergeant Johnson is going to reach the library to get the index before the Covenant do, and the Master Chief and Cortana are sent to silence the Prophet permanently. They leave the structure fighting many Covenant, and Chief makes his way to a gondola towards the temple over the lake. He looks up and sees multiple Covenant ships arriving from slipspace, including High Charity. Cortana mentions that this is the largest fleet any humans have encountered. They hurry off into the temple and assassinate the Prophet. As soon as they get outside, Cortana informs them that the fleet is getting ready to fire on their position. The Chief runs, trying to outrun the blast, and jumps into the lake below. As Chief sinks, a pair of tentacles reaches out and grabs him, saying, "This is not your grave, but you are welcome in it." Meanwhile, the Arbiter is on board High Charity and sees brutes taking the honor guards' helmets and weapons. The elite commander who helped the Arbiter track down the heretic leaders being told that the brutes will be the Prophet's protectors since the elites failed to protect the Prophet of Regret. The Arbiter is told that the oracle that they found on Threshold told them of the sacred icon, and the Arbiter is to get to it before the humans do. When he eventually reaches the library, he realizes that the humans beat him to it. Commander Keyes and Sergeant Johnson have just retrieved it. The Arbiter fights them in an effort to retrieve the index from the woman, but before he can, Tartarus shows up and takes it for himself, captures the 2 humans, and blasts the Arbiter into a deep pit. The Master Chief wakes up and realizes that he's being held by some large flood-like creature known as Gravemind, and he's soon joined by other prisoners, the Monitor for Installation 05, a flood-infected Prophet of Regret, and the latest addition, the Arbiter. After a brief discussion, the Flood teleports Chief and the Arbiter to 2 different locations. Master Chief is teleported on board High Charity, while the Prophet of Truth is telling the Covenant that they have the Sacred Index and the Great Journey is near. As soon as the Chief arrives, the Prophets flee, and he is forced to fight the Covenant. After clearing out the room, he inserts Cortana into a nearby terminal. John leaves her to go after the Prophet, who is moving to the lower levels of the tower. Cortana mentions that the Covenant forces are starting to attack each other. Just then, the UNSC vessel in amber clad flies overhead and crashes into a nearby tower. As they continue to catch up to the Prophet of Truth, they see elites fighting brutes. Cortana informs the Chief that she can see 2 transponders, one for Commander Keyes and the other for Sergeant Johnson, and she advises John to go help them. Keyes and Johnson are split up. The Prophet of Truth gives Tartarus the index just as the Flood arrive. The brutes fight them off, but one of the Flood infection forms attacks the Prophet of Mercy. Tartarus goes to kill the Flood who's taking a hold of the Prophet, but Truth stops him, saying that the Great Journey waits for no one. We see that the Arbiter was teleported to a cliff edge near Delta Halo's control room. After fighting off waves of brutes, the Arbiter eventually runs into the elite commander. Overhead, the pair see phantoms dropping off Tartarus, Commander Keyes, and 343 to the control room. The Master Chief comes across a struggle between the Prophet of Mercy and the Flood infection form. He asks where Truth is headed. The dying Prophet tells him that he's headed to Earth. The Master Chief then kills the Flood, which immediately kills the Prophet as well. Cortana realizes that there's a Forerunner ship in the center of High Charity, and that the Prophet of Truth is headed straight for it. She tells him that he must get to Truth. John mentions that the brutes have the commander and the index and can activate Halo. She tells him if they try, that she will detonate the Inamberclad's reactor to destroy the ring. He goes to pull her from the system, but she says she doesn't want to risk a remote detonation, and that she needs to stay behind. A Pelican crashes nearby, with Flood pouring out of the ship. John leaves her and fights his way through a now Flood-infected High Charity. He enters a green conduit that takes him to the Forerunner ship, but just barely in time as it takes off. Chief promises to come back for Cortana, and she tells him, "Don't make a girl promise if you know you can't keep it." The Forerunner ship jumps into slipspace. Meanwhile, the Arbiter runs into Sergeant Johnson, who is commandeered a Scarab. The 2 form an unlikely truce to stop Tartarus from activating Halo. The Arbiter takes a Banshee and provides cover as they move to attack the control room. Once there, the Scarab blasts an opening. The Arbiter shows up just as Tartarus is trying to force Commander Keyes to activate the ring. He tries to plead with the Brute, telling him that the prophets were wrong, and to prove it, he asked 343 what the purpose of Halo was and the fate of the Forerunners, to which he said they were killed as planned after activating Halo. Tartarus throws 343 at Sergeant Johnson and forces Commander Keyes to activate Halo. The Arbiter kills Tartarus, and after the battle, Miranda runs and grabs Index from the terminal. The built-up energy initiates a beacon to communicate with the other Halo installations, putting them all on standby and ready for remote activation. Commander Keyes asks 343 Guilty Spark where someone would go to activate the rings from. He tells them the Ark. The Forerunner ship with the Prophet of Truth and Master Chief aboard arrive at Earth. The Chief communicates with Admiral Hood, who asks him what is he doing on that ship. He responds, "Sir, finishing this fight." Then, back aboard High Charity, we see it overrun with infestation. Gravemind, who tells Cortana that he has questions and that she will answer. She says, "Alright, shoot." And that ends part 2 of our 5-part series. Please join us on our following episode as we cover the story of Halo 3. From all of us at TST Gaming, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, and until next time, just play.